if someone is boil her, it's not chayiv misa, but there is a kesher.
The only kesher that a person has, that Reuven has with Shimon's Eved, is that they're both breathing the same air from the same globe. That's the only kesher they have. I have no kesher to your Eved. And I have no kesher to a married woman such that I can marry her for the period of time after her husband dies. And I have no kesher with a non-Jewish woman to marry her when she becomes Jewish. So I don't know exactly, I'm sorry that I'm very rigid, but, the terminology kesher is more of a romantic word that I use, when I talk to my children about a kesher that they should have with the Beis HaKnesses or with the Rebbeim in the yeshiva. I talk about the kesher, But
we'll pursue it at a different time. I don't want to.
Okay, fine. Let's talk about Rabbi Akiva. So everybody can turn now to Daf Tzadi Gimel Amid Beis, and we're up to Rabbi Akiva. He was the last one, Achron Chaviv, on the list of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, of those Tanoim who maintain that Adam Makne Dover Shalo Balio. So we want to know now, where is this Rabbi Akiva? So if you have the Daf Tzadi Gimel and Beis, you'll see it gets wide at about 15 lines down from the top. And if you go down to the wide lines, we'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 lines down in the wide lines. It's literally in the middle of the Amud. And we're looking to find Rabbi Akiva. We're going to quote a Mishnah in Masechet Ksubis. And that Mishnah deals with what's called Nidarim, which is a neder that a woman took within the framework of her marriage. And if that neder will in any way impact on the marriage, the Torah granted permission, or shall we say domain, to the Baal to be mefer the neder. And the Torah gave the Baal only a limited amount of time. He has 2 options. He could either declare that the neder is mufar immediately when he hears about it, or at least until sunset of that day. Or if he's silent, then he has tacitly accepted the neder of his wife, which is called kiyum haneder. So he's got hafara and kiyum. Those are the 2 options. And it's really fascinating because we should never confuse 2 concepts that sound very similar, but they are fundamentally different. One is called hafaras habal, and the other is called hataras nedarim. And in the case of hataras nedarim, we're going to discuss the following 2 possibilities. Under what circumstances does Hatara remove the neder me'ikaro, meaning retroactively? Under what circumstances is hafara only chal mikan ulahaba? So let's say, for example, he violated the neder and then he was matir the neder, he still would have to get malchus and punished. He's liable for the violation of the neder, even though subsequently he was matir the neder. Because hataras nedarim, in this particular case, is only chal mikan ulahava. From now on, from the moment of hatara, it has no impact on the neder which he may have taken 50 years ago. And for 50 years, he may have been in violation of the neder. Hatara is not going to be oker the neder meikara. But there is a case of hataras nedarim where the tribunal of 3, I wouldn't call them a bezdin, but those 3 people can be oker the neder meikara. And that's called a Pesach. Pesach means that the noder claims he was unaware of X, Had he been aware of X, he never would have taken the neder. And now his hatara works me din tos. Tos means, I ordered an automobile and you delivered me a very beautiful automobile. Only one problem, the motor doesn't work. That's called a tos. I never signed on to such a marriage, such an automobile. Hafaras habal is radically different because the Gemara says that Isha aldas baila noderes, that when she took the neder, she did so under the premise that her husband would be okay with the neder. He would be, so to speak, satisfied with the neder. Now watch what happens here. Konam shani osa beficha. Okay, again, I want you to find it inside. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Ksubis, because all of Masechet Ksubis is about the relationship between a husband and a wife, and Nedarim are very relevant to Masechet Ksubis, and there's an entire parak in Ksubis that deals with Nedarim. And maybe an easy way of finding this, I just realized it. You see the Tosas on the right side, Divra Maskal li Achar Ches Gayer. So if you go one line below that Tosfos, the line starts with the word v'nitlashu, and you move with your hand to the left, it says Rabbi Akiva Disnan. Konam shani osa b'leficha. All right, let's go slowly. What does the word konam mean? The word konam is a kinui, which I'll explain the word kinui, for carbon. That means in the ancient Aramaic language, very often words would creep into the Aramaic language from the original biblical Hebrew. And the word carbon is a perfect example because the word carbon, which is biblical Hebrew, in the Aramaic of yesteryear was called a konam. Now, what is the relationship between Nedarim and karbanos? Why would I think that if a person wants to take a neder of what's called midrei isur, he would utilize the word konam, which is a bastardization of the word carbon? And the answer is because a carbon is asur. Asur behana. You cannot enjoy any benefit from a carbon. If you do so, you have violated a very severe isur. And in certain cases, you might even chayav a carbon me'ilah. Again, there's an isur hana in carbon, there's an isur me'ilah in carbon, but they're very similar. So this woman declares that her ma'aseh yadayim, which means anything that she gains from her work, let's say wages, are a konam on the Baal, which means that the husband, is not allowed to get benefit from her malach. That's called kolam shani osa. Ani osa means ma'aseh yadeha. Leficha. Leficha means for your mouth. So Rabbi Akiva says that it's a valid neder. What does that mean? It's a valid neder. The ball is now in the court of the Baal. He has to decide one of two things. Either he voices his protest and he's mefer the neder, or he's silent and he has now tacitly accepted that neder, and the neder is binding. The Chachamim say, Eino tzarech lahafer. There is no such thing as a neder on ma'aseh yadayim. Ma'aseh yadayim is a davar shelo ba liolam. She's saying that tomorrow I'm going to spin, weave the garment. And I'm trying to remember what town is it in the Catskills where you could see how they weave the garments. I forget. It's a beautiful trip. My wife is not here, so I can't ask her. But anyway, if you've ever been to a place where they weave quilts and so forth with designs and colors and shapes and everything, and you pay good money for that. So she's saying that any quilt that I will manufacture will be usher to you like a carbon, like a konam. And the Chachamim say, Eino tzarich lahafem. There's no need for the Baal to be made for the neder. It's not a neder at all. Why? Because you can only take a neder on a chefza. The Gemara says at the beginning of Nedarim that a neder is an iser chefza. And you say that this chefza should be usher. Now, if she would point to a quilt that she created and say, this quilt is usher to you beneder, then everybody would agree the Baal better be made for the neder, because that's an iser chefza. But if she says, Maaseh Yadai, my futures, that which I will produce in the future, or wages that I will receive for work that I do in the future, is Asar Alecha Ba'ana Ki Carbon, that doesn't require Hafar. Why? Because the Chachamim hold that it's a Davar Shelo Bali. And Rabbi Akiva says, Yefer. The Baal, if he's good for his money, he will declare Hafar, that the neder is mufar. So far, so good, except that I read the next few words in the Mishnah in Ksubis, and I don't know what is going on. Shema Tadif Olav Yeser Min Aroy. Rabbi Akiva doesn't say outright that the neder is valid. Rabbi Akiva says maybe the neder is valid. And Rabbi Akiva recommends that the Baal better get off his whatever and be made for the neder, because otherwise it could be that the neder will be chal. Why? Because maybe she will be madif. What's that all about? So Rabosai, here we have to introduce a little bit of Masechet Ksubis. And when we talk about Maaseh Yadayim, the produce and the income of a married woman, and what is the status of Maaseh Yadayim in the Ksuba, which means in the relationship between a husband and wife, we have a concept called Shibud. Shin, Ayin, Beis, Vav, Dalet. And what that means is that the way the Chachamim established the Ksuba and the relationship on a financial basis between a husband and a wife is that he has to support her, that's called mizonos, and she has to offer him Maaseh Yadayim, which means that if she has any earnings, they accrue to the husband by virtue of the ksuba. And she has a shibud. Shibud means that there's no choice in the matter. It's a financial obligation. Now, when Ruvain has a financial obligation to Shimon, which is called a shibud, Ruvain cannot take a neder to box out Shimon from his financial rights. A neder could not be mafkia, it cannot undermine a shibud. So how then can a woman, in the context of a ksuba, take a neder to prohibit Maaseh Yadayim from the husband, that the husband will not benefit any way whatsoever from her Maaseh Yadayim? That would be a neder on a shibud. And Rabbi Akiva says, nevertheless, he should take his option of hafara and be made for the neder. Why? If a neder cannot be chal against the shibud, to undermine a shibud, what rights does a woman have? How can she create a neder and say, Kona Maaseh Yadai Alecha Beficha? The answer is shematad. And now we get into another concept, which is called ha'adafa. Ha'adafa means surplus, beyond the shibud. And the ksuba will set up the parameters of the shibud. Let's say, for example, just throwing out an example here, the average woman, if she produces Masechet Yevamot, it will be worth 50 zuz. She went ahead, she went to medical school, and after she graduated medical school, she studied, she majored in psychiatry, and guess what? She gets paid 500 zuz, not 50 zuz, because this guy sits on a couch and spills all his problems, and she listens, or supposedly listens. You know the famous joke about, they asked the psychiatrist, don't you get depressed listening to all the tsaras that people pour out? He says, who listens? Anyway, so she makes hadafa, so she gets a salary which is way beyond the shibud. And Rabbi Akiva says that now the neder will be chal because of shematadif. The shiur, the amount that she has to bring in, is established by the chachamim as a set amount, and she's mishubedes for that shiur. But beyond that shiur, which is called hadafa, Eino Shalo, he doesn't have any shibud, any claim. Ela Shalo, you talk about feminism, the halacha represents feminism. And a woman could have a pretty nice little, bank account of her own, little hidden bank account, because she does hadafa. She's making a lot of money. And v'yachol l'asra, she now has the power through her neder to prohibit her husband from enjoying the benefit of the hadafa. Says Rabbi Akiva, in such a case, we would highly recommend that the husband be made for the neder. You know why? Because if he doesn't make for the neder, he may violate it. Chas v'shalom. And violate a lav d'oraisa, lo yachol dvoro, and a mitzvahs asay d'oraisa, kol asher motzeh v'sechon tishmar, because he's not careful to distinguish between that part of her Masechet Yevamot which is not included in the neder, and the part that is included in the neder. V'eina bal yachol lizoyer, he cannot be careful, shelo yikach mimeno ela kashir shekavu chacham. He'll make sure that he will take 50 zuz and not a penny more, not 51 zuz. B'tzimtzum. He might not be able to be mitzamtzum. And therefore, we have now a neder which is called beino leveino. It has to do with the marriage relationship. And the neder will be chal on hadafa. And the Chazal tell this husband to be made for the neder, because otherwise he might get involved in violating a neder because he won't be able to be mitzamtzem. And therefore he should be made for the neder. So if Nachman comes along and he says, okay, I understand why this neder might be chal, according to Rabbi Akiva, from the perspective of shibudim, because she might be madif on Masechet Yevamot. But why does Rabbi Akiva recognize the validity of the neder at all? The neder is on futures. It's on Masechet Yevamot that's going to come later on. Says Rav Nachman, Isha shenodra v'asras Masechet Yevamot kishiyavo liolam is chal neder l'das Rabbi Akiva mishum sheRabbi Akiva sover adam mak the davar shelo b'olam. The neder is chal on the davar shelo b'olam on Masechet Yevamot. And this, my friends, is the end of a long sugya that took us about a week called Adam Makne Dover Shalom. Now we go back to our Mishnah. Okay, then? So we're now going back to Masechet Yevamot. The Mishnah says, Isha sha'amru la shemesu baila ubina. They told her that what? That both her husband and her son died. She went out and got married to someone from the shuk. They had told her that first the son had died, then the Baal died. I'm sorry, just the opposite. Sorry. First the Baal died, and then the son died, which means that there was no mitzvah of Yibum, because when her husband died, he left the Zerah, and now, to her dismay, after getting married to someone, she finds out that it was the exact opposite. That her child had died first, never, or I should say his child, because even if it's not her child, but it's his child. And then her husband died, meaning she fell for Yibum. She was Yevamot L'Shuk. And now we have Machlokes, whether or not Kedushin Tovsim be Yevamot L'Shuk, Rav and Shmuel, and we could introduce Rabbi Akiva, but then Kedushin Tovsim B'chayvei Lavim. And now the Gemara wants to know, how did this all happen? Boy, me name Rav Sheshes. They asked Rav Sheshes the following question. Eid echad b'Yevamot. So we have a case of an almana, and we don't know if there are children from her late husband. One witness comes, and he says, your husband died, and you need Yibum, meaning he left no Zerah. And you need Yibum. Now, Yibum entails violating a lav sheyesh bo kares of Eshes Ach. We know that her late husband had a son. We don't know whether that son was alive at the time of the death of her husband. This one witness is testifying that at the moment of his death, there were no children, and therefore you fall for Yibum. The first implication, like first responders of this testimony, is that she falls for Yibum to the brother of her husband. That's called Eshes Ach. Does one aid have nemanus and credibility to permit her to enter into a Yibum relationship with Eshes Ach? Now, offhand, when I read this Gemara, Eid Echad B'Yevamot Ma'u, I am very put aback, so to speak. I'm taken aback by this question. The Torah does not trust one aid. The Torah requires two witnesses. Al pishnayim eidim yakum davar. How could the Gemara suggest that will be matir and iser Eshes Ach and assume that there's Yibum based on the testimony of one aid? To the best of our knowledge, this husband had a child. So the only answer I could come up with is what's called in the legal terminology in law, precedent. There's a precedent for this. There is a case where we trust one aid, and that's the Misas Habal at the beginning of our chapter. One witness testified that her husband died. And although the Torah would not normally rely on the testimony of one aid, but in this case of Misas Habal, we recognize and rely on the testimony of one witness. So that creates a precedent for allowing, in a case of Eshes Ish in our Mishnah, to accept the testimony and rely on the testimony of one aid. How much more so in the case of Eshes Ah, which is an erva, a very severe erva with an Isakares, but it's not as severe as Eshes Ish. However, I'm not happy because the reason why we believe an Eid Echad on Misas Habal, the backdrop of it is what we call aguna. We don't want to leave a woman in a situation where she can't get married. Maybe her husband is still alive. The man went out to war. He didn't come back from war. We don't have two witnesses to testify that Nebuchadnezzar was killed in battle. The Eid Echad testifies, and she knows that he's telling the truth. We're going to allow her to get married. Mishum Igu. Does the same thing apply here? That's what I'm racking my brains with regard to Yibum. If we don't know whether the man's, her previous husband's son died first or second, she's virtually an aguna. She can't get married because in event that her son, I should say his son again, I made that mistake. His son died first. She's Yevamot L'Shuk. She can't marry anyone except for the Yama, the surviving brother. If, on the other hand, her husband died first and his son died second, just 1 second. If, what do we say? Yeah. And if, on the other hand, we'll say, well, let the Yama marry her. She's not an aguna, because what are you worried about? You're worried about the fact that the son died first, and she's Yevamot L'Shuk. Okay, so let the Yama marry her. No, I can't do that either, because maybe the child survived his father, and now she, to the second, to the brother, both Shimon, is Eshes Ah. Her situation is such that she can't marry anybody. She is an aguna. In the case of an aguna, we can rely on the testimony of one aid, as we saw in our Mishnah. But I'm still not a happy camper, because let the Yavam give her chalitza. Then Mimanavshach she can marry. If on the one hand she's Yavama, well, she got chalitza. Okay. It could be she didn't need the chalitza because the son survived his father. But chalitza can't hurt. And if her son indeed survived her husband, she can marry anybody. Because her husband is dead, she's an almana, and there's no mitzvah yibum. if her son survived beyond the death of his father. And if on the worst case scenario, that didn't happen, and she falls for Yibum, then let him give a chalitza. So let's see the Gemara inside. In the case of Misas Habal, why did the Chachamim rely on one aid? Mishum de Milsa Davidi Ligluye Lo Meshaker. You don't lie about someone's death. You cannot put yourself in such a precarious situation unless it's absolutely true and testify that so-and-so died. Because tomorrow, he's going to come walking in alive. That's called a Milsa Davida Ligluya. Lo Meshakri. No matter how low of a scoundrel you are, you're not going to lie when we're going to find out that you lied. Ochanami Lo Meshakir. If he's testifying about the death of her husband, and he's adding that the Ben might have died before the husband, and therefore she falls for Yibum, even if he's a no good scoundrel and a liar, he's going to get caught in his lie. Lo Meshaker, he would not lie to say Shemes v'naflo li'ibum. O Dilma, Taima di Echad Mishum di Daiko Minsaba Hacha de Zimnin Dirachamole Lo Daiko U Minsaba. She has vested interests in marrying the Yavam. In the case of Ashes Ish, in the case of Ashes Ish, she's not going to get married unless she knows for sure her husband is dead. So we're not relying on the Eid Echad, or not only on the Eid Echad, we're relying on her. In the case of Yibum, he might have vested interests. It's like if he wants to marry the Yavam, if the Eid Echad testifies that he fought for Yibum, so she's going to be very happy with his testimony. But why not say the same thing? In other words, are we operating with a vision of purity that a married woman is not interested in marrying someone else? So I'm not sure. Maybe it's because of all the punishments and the penalties that she'll suffer. In other words, on the side that her husband's still alive, if he comes back alive and well, then she's going to lose her ksuba from this one and that one. The child, if she got married to a second man, she's going to have to get divorced from him, and the child from that marriage is a mamzer. She's playing with fire. That's called daiku mitzvah. She's going to go over the top in her investigation to be absolutely sure that her husband is dead. Therefore, we can rely on the 1/8. Not so in the case of Yibum, where the 8 is testifying that the husband survived the child, and therefore she falls for Yibum. I don't know. She might be inclined to accept his testimony so that she could marry the Yavam. Because keep in mind, there's no way in the halachic world that she could marry the Yavam unless there's a mitzvah of Yibum. No other way possible. So in case, again, I don't know if there are any indication, but in case she wants that marriage relation with the Yavam, keep in mind, the Yavam has the same genes as her husband. Maybe he looks the same, maybe he's a twin. Whatever it is, she has a certain chiba, a love for this man. I don't know if any of you can corroborate, can reflect this. In my family, my uncle, my father's brother, was married, obviously, to my aunt, but she was his first cousin. I don't know. I don't know if this is scientific, this comment, or not. I'm not sure it's always the healthiest thing to marry your first cousin. But in any event, there is retardation in that family. I don't know. I don't know what your feeling is about that.
But some places in the U.S., you can't marry your first cousin.
For this reason, because of there are genealogical problems?
Right. There's states where you can, but there's states where you can't.
In halacha, you're allowed to. And I have a very close friend right here in Telstone. I'm pointing across the way here. He's married to his first cousin. Baruch Hashem, they have wonderful children, grandchildren. It's quite common.
It's my understanding throughout history, the Jews married their cousins, and look where we are today in terms of what we've been able to accomplish.
But I'm just curious. I mean, if I would take a census here, am I the only one who could testify that? Again, in this case, it's my uncle, my father's brother, who married my aunt. I mean, you go to the cemetery in Akron, Ohio, where they lived when they came over from Plisa, from the shtetl, and half the cemetery are my relatives, because either related to me on my aunt's side or on my uncle's side. But none of you have any relatives who are married cousins, no?
Yeah.
Right.
No, my father's sister married a cousin.
Oh, there it is. There you have it. So, the fact that a woman might be, in other words, relatives that are raised together or have a lot of common history and a lot of interaction, maybe that increases the chance of wanting to marry such a person. And in this case, the Gemara is worried about the fact that she may have vested interest for Yibum. It could be that she thinks that as an almana, it's going to be very hard for her to get married. She's not whatever. She's not such a great catch on the market. I don't know, but Yibum, I mean, that's like right under her nose. So the 8 Echad says that she falls for Yibum. She's fine with that. And there's no Daiku Mitzvah, because Daiku Mitzvah means that she did research because she was afraid of the opposite. That if her husband's alive, she's going to be in deep trouble. So she does a very thorough research, so that's Daiku Mitzvah. So let's go over. If we say that the reason why we believe the 8 Echad is because the Milsa David Gluye, and he's going to be caught, caught in the act if he lies. Same thing should apply to the Eid Echad in the case of Yibum, because we can check out. I mean, we may have evidence to prove that he's a liar. But in the case, right? But if the other side is correct, the reason why the Chachamim rely on the testimony of one aid is simply because of Daiku Mitzvah, then in Yibum, we don't really have a reliable parallel to Daiku Mitzvah.
The surviving brother inherited everything from the dead brother, though, too, right?
Probably.
So, I mean, she may have a financial interest in marrying him too, because
Correct. Could be.
he's inheriting all of the wealth that her husband had.
Correct. Or certainly he will, just 1 second. Certainly, no, that's, yeah. All right, so we have to stop now. I'll just read one more line. Amar Rav Sheshes, Tanisua, and the Gemara that we want to study tomorrow is going to analyze our Mishnah here in Yevamos and decide which of the two tzadim are correct and whether or not we can indeed rely on the testimony of one aid to allow her to be misyabemes to the brother of the her late husband. So we're going to try to prove it from the Mishnah. So that's what we'll pick up.